Next, we're going to talk about Part 2, losses paid and incurred, which is actually page 9 in the statutory statement. And here again, these parts and schedules are simply the detail for what appears in the actual financial statement pages that we talked about earlier. In this case, there are a few more columns represented, 1 through 8 here on Part 2, but don't let that intimidate you. It's no less complicated. The far left-hand side, or margin, once again, that's 1 through 35. Those are actually the product lines of business that the company is writing. If you look at column 1, direct business, that's under the section losses paid less salvage, and you'll see that that applies to columns 1 through 4. Column 2 is reinsurance assumed. When we talked about premium being assumed in Part 1, that was voluntary business that the company would write from another insurance company, and if you paid claims on any of those policies that you had written, assumed business for, it would appear in column 2. Column 3, reinsurance recovered. And earlier we talked about ceding off some of the risk for the business that this company would be writing, and if you have losses that have been paid on that business and recognized as such, you've received money from that reinsurance company to offset that loss. That's shown as reinsurance recovered against those claim payments in column 3. Once again, column 4 is simply the culmination of columns 1, 2, and 3. So in terms of net payments, you're going to add column 1, the direct business that you've paid claims on. Column 2 is the reinsurance assumed business that you've paid claims on. And you're going to subtract from 1 and 2 column 3, which is the reinsurance recovered on those claims. Column 5 is net losses unpaid for the current year. It's Part 2A, column 8. So that references another part where you're going to be able to look at the detail behind this. Column 6, net losses unpaid prior year. Column 7, losses incurred current year. That's a culmination of columns 4 when we went back and looked at the net claims paid for this company. Now we're going to look at the change in the loss reserve for this company, the loss reserves at the end of the prior year, and the loss reserves at the end of the current year. The change in those numbers is added to the net paid to get the net losses incurred, which is, in fact, column 7. So you can see in column 7, losses incurred current year, columns 4 plus column 5 minus column 6. That's the standard formula for incurred losses, and that works throughout the annual statement. Column 8, percentage of losses incurred. This is column 7, part 2, what we just reviewed, as a percentage of premiums earned, which was column 4, part 1 that we talked about earlier. So you're going to take a look at these net losses incurred compared to the net premiums earned for these respective product lines that the company's writing. That's going to give you a loss ratio. So if you look at line 1, the fire line of business, you can see that losses incurred represent 25.6% of the premiums earned for the fire line of coverage. Part 2A, if you look down the left-hand side, as with the other parts, you can see that the lines of business are represented there. Column 1 is the direct reported losses. And here again, these are unpaid losses, claims based on the actual cases or the actual claims that are submitted to the insurance company for settlement. Column 2, here again, we've got reinsurance assumed, and that represents the unpaid claims on the business that the company voluntarily assumed from another insurance company to share that risk. Column 3, deduct reinsurance recoverable. Here again, we're not dealing with actual paids or received dollar amounts from the reinsurer. These are amounts that are recoverable or due from the reinsurer who has decided to share the risk with the company. Column 4, is the net losses excluding incurred but not reported claims, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and it is represented by columns 1 plus 2 minus 3. So here again, column 4 is simply the culmination of the 3 preceding columns. Moving on to column 5, 6, and 7, these 3 columns deal with the incurred but not reported claims. And I mentioned a little bit earlier on page 3 that the incurred but not reported is a component of the overall losses that really relates more to a timing issue than probably anything else. Column 8 is net losses unpaid. So now we're going to take into consideration column 4, which is the net losses excluding incurred but not reported, and you're going to add to that column 5 and column 6 and subtract column 7, which is the incurred but not reported component of the total reserve. And so column 8 is the total net losses unpaid by taking column 4 plus column 5 plus column 6 minus column 7. The last column, column 9, that you're going to see on part 2A is the net unpaid loss adjustment expenses. And we've touched on loss adjustment expenses briefly. This is a continuation of what that unpaid dollar amount looks like for those loss adjustment expenses clearly identifiable and accounted for in column 9. Here again, you can see that that's presented by the respective line of business as shown in the far left-hand column